What's up, y'all? It's Omar, and for this video, I'm going to be looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23, where it says, "Even though I'm a free man with no master, I've become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I too lived under the law. Even though I'm not subject to the law, I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. When I'm with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from that law so I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore the law of God. I obey the law of Christ. When I'm with those who are weak, I share their weaknesses. For I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and to share in its blessings." And all that to say, this is like Paul. The first verse is probably the one I could have just gone off of and gave y'all the message, but so even though I'm a free man with no master, I become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. This isn't him literally becoming a slave, because at this time, let's look at the context. This is to the Corinthian church, and he's saying, I become a slave. At this time, slave didn't mean, you had to work for them and he would get beat if he didn't. This is like indentured servitude or simply a servant. And that's what Christ had called us to do, and he called Paul to do, to be a servant of many. He said those who want to be the greatest are gonna have to be like the low. It was something like that. It's gonna have to be the lowest or something along those lines. But I'm a free man with no master. I become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. He said, I've become a slave, a servant, to bring all to all people, to bring many to Christ. He did all this to bring people to Christ. He followed the Jewish law, and he lived like a Jew to bring Jews to Christ. And then when he was hanging around the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, he says, I too live apart from the law so I can bring them to Christ. But then it says, when I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I lived under the law. I lived under that law. Even though I'm not subject to the law, I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. Because when Paul knew, because he was in Christ, there was no condemnation, and that he was not subject to the law. But he knew that they were living under the law and they weren't in Christ. So he said, I'll live under the law so I can bring them to Christ, and henceforth make them not